I'd like to welcome everyone to today's e-showcase, Overcoming Wastewater Cybersecurity Challenge to Combat Evolving Threats. I'd like to thank today's sponsor, Clarity, for sponsoring today's event. We have some great speakers today. The first one is going to be Admiral Michael S. Rogers, who retired in 2018 from the U.S. Navy after a distinguished 37-year career. In March 2014, he was appointed by President Barack Obama as the 17th Director of the National Security Agency and the second Commander of U.S. Cyber Command. Michael Arceneaux has managed the Water Information Sharing and Analysis Center since 2008. He is also the Chief Operating Officer of the Association of Metropolitan Water Agencies, where he began his career in the water industry in 1995. Our moderator for today is going to be Michael Mimosa, who is Editorial Director at Clarity and a former longtime journalist with more than 20 years of experience writing about cybersecurity for online publications. So without further ado, I am going to go ahead and hand the presentation over to our presenter and Mike.
My pleasure to be your moderator for the rest of this discussion with two other guys named Mike. This was great planning, but we will definitely get through it. This is a very important conversation. Your perspective, how would you describe cybersecurity awareness, preparedness in the water sector right now?
But first, the sector itself is really interesting. It's a bit of a hybrid. It has a large government-run component to it, because for a lot of municipalities, water is run by an element of local or county, and in some places, state-structured mechanisms. On the other hand, in some municipalities, they have outsourced this, and it's a commercially run operation. At the same time, it's a heavily regulated sector, and so companies just don't have, or municipal water entities just don't have unilateral authority in many cases to do whatever they want, raise rates to whatever level they want, to price whatever. Because remember, for an entity here, your two primary sources of money to actually execute cybersecurity are either through what you charge, and if you're a municipality who sets the rates as a government, you just don't unilaterally change water rates, or if you are also a municipality, you're looking to see if the local populace will allocate funds to support you. So it's a really interesting hybrid. So I always try to remind people, look, you got to understand the context for cybersecurity. Another thing that I think makes cybersecurity challenging within the sector is you have a lot of very small locally run operations. I mean, Oldsmar is a great example of that, where we saw a cybersecurity incident in the sense that an external actor was able to penetrate the network infrastructure associated with the operation of a water system at a local municipality, or in this case, Oldsmar, Florida. And so for many of these entities, look, you don't have a massive amount of money, you don't have a massive amount of resources, you don't have a lot of expertise. And you may also, in my case, another challenge I found, because I got involved in this again in my previous life where we were tasked to help support critical infrastructure. Some of these systems from a cyber perspective are very old and have a lot of vulnerability. So this is a sector, quite frankly, I was always concerned about from a cybersecurity perspective. And finally, you got a lot of external actors, both ransomware, criminal, as well as nation state focused on the sector. So unfortunately, it tends to be a target, if you will, for multiple entities.
Right. Right. And yeah, and they're all pointed at water and other critical infrastructure sectors right now. Mike Arceneaux, I'd love to hear your perspective on the same question in terms of, from your perspective, working with the WaterISAC, you deal directly with a lot of these utilities. And as Admiral Rogers said, there are varying sizes and shapes and resource capabilities behind some of these. What's your perspective in terms of their awareness, their preparedness, the discussions that they're having these days?
Well, in addition to the characteristics that the Admiral just mentioned, it's also an enormous sector. 50+ thousand drinking water systems and 16,000+ wastewater utilities, and those are of a certain size category. Then you have tens of thousands of really tiny systems beyond that. The smaller they get, the fewer people on staff are available. And even mid-sized utilities are lacking in cybersecurity personnel, IT personnel, for that matter. So it is a strange sector, and it means that we need to come up with some fairly unique ways to help the sector. Yeah.
So, Admiral Rogers, with the title of this webinar is Overcoming Cybersecurity Challenges, I think we should identify some specific ones to kind of table set here. Just from your perspective, what are some of the biggest challenges in the sector? Because we've talked about resources and size and expertise, and those are certainly significant. But maybe from a more technical perspective, what do you think are some of the challenges?
I think number one, in some systems are still, depending on what scale they operate. There's a spectrum of some that are still very manually operated, and there are others, particularly large, that are highly automated, highly networked, have a lot of remote access, have a lot of remote connectivity built into the structure. So again, it's not a monolith here. There's a spectrum of structures. So for some, the potential vulnerability is very high, while for others, it's significantly low. I also thought another element in this, as Michael said, most do not have significant IT resources, let alone cybersecurity resources. It's just not a core aspect of the way most water or wastewater treatment systems are structured. And because they are run by municipalities in many cases, I see some municipalities try to use a strategy where rather than having a separate or discrete cybersecurity, CISO, CIO kind of focus at the plant or process level, municipalities will go, well, this will be one element of a citywide, cybersecurity effort, for example. And please don't take those as criticism, meaning more as an observation.
Sure.
So it's the challenge if you're a system operator, man, you got a lot of challenges. And I have some ideas when we talk about solutions, but I'm struck by more than almost any other sector that I dealt with. Water treatment, wastewater had so many inherent challenges and such a spectrum of structures and capabilities built into it that I was concerned, guys, a one-size-fits-all approach is not going to work here. It just doesn't scale, to Michael's point, based on the size and the characteristics. And so I look forward to when we talk about, hey, what are some of the specific things we could be doing? But I know Michael probably has a perspective on this as well.
Well, yeah, so the smaller and medium-sized systems, their biggest challenges are access to funding and personnel, as we mentioned. They're relying on rates, a small rate base, and there may be pressure to maintain rates at a lower level. Makes it hard to raise money to hire outside help. a lot of medium-sized systems outsource IT, but whether they're outsourcing cybersecurity, I'm not sure. I kind of have my concerns about that. And many utilities are doing a fantastic job at all levels. I should have said this in the beginning, but I've spoken to plenty of small system utility GMs and medium-sized system GMs, and they really get it. You know, they understand the importance of it. I think the larger systems security challenges, as I understand it, it's you know, these are the ones who have a CISO or something like it. They've got their IT in-house instead of outsourced to the city. So they're doing all the right things, but maybe they're lacking visibility into their OT networks. If you don't have that, then you're not quite sure what might be lurking in the dark. So that's an important solution that I think we need to see some growth area in.
Right. So I just want to follow up on one thing you said, that you were talking about decision makers. You know, they get it, they understand the problems that was there. Has that understanding been there all along, or was there a recent kind of turning point for that in terms of ramping up the urgency for cybersecurity?
Well, certainly. I mean, we've been banging a drum, and the other associations in the sector have been banging a drum for a long time. The approach that the sector has taken, along with US EPA and DHS, has been one providing free tools, encouraging, doing training, things like that. But it's really not enough.
Right.
Often, it's not enough because there are just so darn many utilities out there. You know, you have to get out, and for the really small ones and the medium-sized ones, you have to get out there and touch them. You have to hold their hands and help them through this. But certainly when Oldsmar occurred, that made a lot of GMs and a lot of mayors very nervous and sort of to ask a lot of questions. You know, luckily, no one was hurt in Florida, but it was certainly a fortunate thing to have happened in terms of getting the attention of the sector.
Right.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo one thing Michael said. The challenge to me is not that the sector doesn't recognize the importance of cybersecurity. I think you got a lot of really motivated people who want to try to ensure that the system they're responsible for operates in a safe and secure way. The challenge to me is much more one of capacity, understanding, resources, and how we help them on this journey. Because I think the challenge is this is beyond the scope of most, not all, but most within the sector to deal with on their own. I just think, given the characteristics of this sector, it's unrealistic to say, hey, you guys got this. It's up to you. I don't think that's going to work.
Yeah, and I think Michael made a great point. I mean, we have to go out there and touch them and bring the information to them, like the free tools that are available from the DHS, as you said. How many of the smaller operations know that these are available, and how to use them and what they're for, and take full advantage of them? And, you know, I would assume something like the ISACs and other DHS, you know, need to really ramp up their marketing and outreach and make sure these capabilities are, you know, brought to the table.
Yeah, you know, I think it's really important what you just said about other sectors, because other sectors are in the same boat. Small and medium-sized businesses, just like small and medium-sized county water systems. You know, let's say you land on the DHS CISA page with the tools and the assessments and the, what does it mean? Where do you even start? You know, so you know, if I were the chairman of Senate Appropriations, I would pay for an army of cybersecurity professionals to get out there and step people through what needs to happen. But short of that, you know, we need to provide some incentives and maybe some sticks to encourage compliance.
Yeah. You know, I had Oldsmar a little further down in our conversation, but it's come up a couple of times, so let's get it out there. I mean, cybersecurity is traditionally very reactive, and this was the big incident for water so far, and thankfully it was fairly limited, and they did a great job in disseminating information. I'll start with you, Admiral Rogers. Just kind of, you know, now that we're a little more than a year after Oldsmar, what kind of a dent did it make among owners and operators within the sector? What are the lessons learned?
I think clearly it was a wake-up call. I mean, I think it really had a significant impact in the sector because it, number one, it provided a sense of reality to, hey, this isn't theoretical, this is something. Number two, the fact that they picked up a small local municipality. You know, it wasn't like, well, I don't have to worry about this. They're going to go after the Chicago and the New York, you know, and the big city systems. I don't think this is something that necessarily is something I need to worry about. I also think it was important because it showed you the value of an individual. Because in this case, look, you had an attacker who penetrated the network. And what they were trying, you know, to do was change the chemical treatment process to the point where it got to a level of toxicity. And you had an employee who, you know, hey, this doesn't make sense, what we're seeing. And it's sort of saying, hey, it wasn't an IT individual. You know, it was an employee who realized, hey, look, I'm seeing activity that doesn't make sense and shouldn't be ongoing. Hey, we need to stop about this, which I thought was really good. So in the end, we had no harm. I think the other thing that's important to me is I hope we view this as a wake-up call to the fact that the current approach, now it's a year past that, but the current approach is not going to get us where we need to go. And it's not because people aren't working hard. You know, that's not the case. For example, it took Oldsmar to get CISA to come back with specific cyber hygiene recommendations for water plant operations, from software configurations to, you know, cyber physical safety controls, et cetera. And I'm thinking to myself, so why is it taking events? Same thing with Colonial Pipeline. It took Colonial Pipeline to get TSA is responsible for pipelines security, which again, that's a bizarre one to me, but that's the decision that was made in the government. It wasn't until after Colonial Pipeline that we actually decided that the oversight organization should actually promulgate both a series of cybersecurity standards as well as promulgate a series of cybersecurity actions that pipeline owners could take. I'm like, really? How long have we had this responsibility? We waited until we had a major event? So I think it also shows you there's a wake-up call to this idea of, guys, we have got to get ahead of this problem set. We cannot wait until we have a significant issue to suddenly decide, oh, maybe we need to ask ourselves, so what is it I should be doing?
Yeah. And Michael, from the ISAC perspective, you're very close with a lot of utilities. Just what have you seen in the last year in terms of, you know, better discussions, better sharing, any improvements as a result of Oldsmar, or just kind of, you know, the awareness that this can happen to me too, regardless of size?
Well, the negative side of Oldsmar is that, I mean, I think that sheriff was terrific in his willingness to go public like that. You don't need to go public like that, but sharing with the sector is an immense help to the sector. But all of the attention may also have scared some utilities from not report. So that might be unfortunate if that's what's going on. I don't have any evidence that it is, but
yeah, that's interesting.
But you know, it brought attention to the vulnerabilities of the OT side of the house. It made the OT side of the house a discussion topic, I think. You know, a lot of cyber incidents are on the enterprise side, the ransomware attacks and things like that. So it brought attention to that. It also brought attention to the need for secure remote access. There are a lot of utilities who want to be able to operate their operational systems remotely for many very good reasons. But connecting to the internet is not such a great idea. But if you need to, there are ways to do it securely. So that was a good discussion to have about that. I think across the board, I think the water sector is more secure than it was a year ago. With the best practices that have been adopted, and these aren't best practices that popped up in the last year. They're just finally being pulled off the shelf and dusted off. And everybody in the sector is behind putting together even better materials to help utilities, especially to help those who may not be able to digest the complexity of a best practices guide or the NIST CSF.
I think, if I could, one other thought.
Sure.
I think it also shows you how we really need to go back to some of the basics for cyber hygiene. I mean, in this case, the actor gained access to a computer that was operating Windows 7. I mean, that's not even supported anymore, that, gets no updates, that has no safety, that has no security fixes, and there is a lot of old infrastructure, both in the IT and the OT segments within this sector. And, one of my takeaways from Oldsmar was, guys, we need to really start with the basics here and go back to how we configured our systems. What's our basic cyber hygiene? We have, fundamental basic security built in place, or we're running a lot of potential vulnerabilities that we don't even recognize.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in this case, there was the person on the outside who got in and changed the levels, used remote access application that wasn't even authorized anymore, and several people had access to the password. So, so there. Anyway, a lot of wrongs. That's what
basic blocking and tackling, right?
Yeah.
In terms of cybersecurity.
Yeah.
Just a reminder to attendees: if you have any questions for our guests, please enter them in the Q&A panel, and we'll get them out as soon as we get them. And just one more Oldsmar question, and Admiral Rogers, I wanted to point it towards you. Let's pretend it had been a ransomware attack. Could they, or should water utilities take the same approach as Colonial and shut it down if you can't bill your customers or access your IT systems? I guess the question is, what do you think about this strategy overall, since it's been adopted in other industries?
Yeah, so one of the reasons why water infrastructure has been a target in ransomware is because of the view of the criminal actor. Most entities can't afford to go without water, or can't afford to not treat waste sewage, or don't want to afford, can't afford the potential of massive dumps, for example, of water or wastewater, and therefore they'd be inclined to pay more than perhaps some sectors. I think that's one reason why this, now it wasn't a ransomware issue, but I think that's something we need to be mindful of. What I always try to tell entities is, look, there's no one-size-fits-all. Part of this goes to, if you are the victim of a ransomware attack, then asking yourself, okay, how long will it take me to come up with an alternative method to either restore functionality or access to whatever has been locked down, whether it's data, whether it's on your OT and your industrial control system side, et cetera. And then you start to get into trade-offs about, okay, can I afford to do that from a mission standpoint in terms of what is the impact if I lose water distribution, water production, sewage movement, sewage treatment? What's the impact if I lose that for X amount of hours, days? So there is no one size it's all here. I'm not one who says, well, the answer is never, ever pay ransom. I don't think it's quite that simple. And there are some sectors where the level of risk and the potential impact to safety and human well-being transcends an economic or a business decision driven by revenue. Hey, how much would this cost me? You know, if we would have significant degradation. So water is one of those sectors where I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all on the ransom piece. And there's a series of steps I think you need to go through if you become a victim of ransomware, as I said.
Right.
That you need to walk your way through rather than just defaulting to I will always pay or I will never pay. I don't think it's a binary situation.
Yeah. Michael, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I mean, on the enterprise side, it's probably easier to recover because you can still run the business. But on the OT side, not being able to produce water or treat wastewater goes against your mission, your reason for being. I've never heard of a utility shutting down operations because of an attack. What likely would happen would be they would go to manual operation, which, as the Admiral said early on, you know, it ranges depending on the resources available, the capabilities of the utility. More automation actually makes it harder to go to operate remotely, and also anyone who can operate remotely, it can only be done for so long. It's quite exhausting. It's an all hands on deck type of thing, but it would give the utility time to bring someone in to investigate whether they indeed were attacked, or whether indeed the ransomware did reach the OT system, and whether the problem can be fixed and without turning off the water.
Right. So I want to talk a little bit about threat actor groups. It's come up a couple of times, and especially in the context of the Ukraine war. There's always that threat of activity in cyberspace alongside kinetic war. Michael, maybe we can start with you in terms of this seems to be a nonstop stream of information coming from CISA and DHS with advice for all critical infrastructure sectors, not just water, in terms of awareness, in terms of best practices. I'm just curious on your take in terms of the information that's coming out, how useful it's been, how much it's been adopted, what you're hearing in terms of questions from anyone specific in the sector.
Yeah, no, in December, you know, CISA called and said we need to get this information out. We worked with EPA to produce a joint advisory about the Russia situation we're talking about. And then we did a redo in January. And then the associations themselves pushed out this information. So it got out pretty far, which is pretty amazing because of people realize the capacity of Russia to pull off sophisticated attacks. Luckily, there hasn't been any that we know of, but it certainly did raise awareness, and it did come with some very practical best practices. Both the CISA release advisory and the EPA WaterISAC release had some pretty simple things that could be done to prevent a serious attack. And overall, there is an enormous amount of threat information flowing. We subscribe to everything. We are tied into private firms. We talk to our members. There's just so much coming through. And one of our main jobs is to sift through that information and find out what is relevant to a water utility. Because I was just at an event yesterday and someone was complaining about how much information they received. And it's really, it kind of does the sector a disservice to just throw everything at them, you know, what's important, what's not important, what's relevant, what's not relevant. So that's kind of our job, WaterISAC's job, to do that, to help filter out what's not relevant.
Sure.
Yeah, I think Michael makes a really good point there. Part of the challenge from a government perspective is we've got to tailor insight, recommendations, and threat info down to something that's very specific, very applicable at an execution level within a particular sector. It isn't the way broad, and I was part of this process. Historically, that's not the way broadly we tend to think in government. We often think, hey, more information is better, and if we just provide more information, more insight, that automatically will produce greater knowledge and help. You know, the private sector, the more I spend time in this world, the more I'm thinking to myself, you know, it's much more about tailoring and providing specificity and getting down to, okay, you know, tell me specifically what should I be focused on, what should I prioritize, what are the 10 things that I need to do? Don't give me generics, don't give me 100 things. You know, give me a top 10 and prioritize. Here's what you would suggest at my level I should do.
And in plain English.
Yeah.
Yes. That's huge and overlooked often. You're right.
The joint ISAC EPA threat advisories went to, thanks to EPA's system, to 50,000, 70,000 utilities. And we tried to write it in a way that made sense to more than just, you know, the CISO.
Right.
Because a lot of the end users, they don't even have systems. They just don't have that level of expertise resident within their system.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you don't want to get them lost in jargon and cyber-specific terms, and it's just kind of immediate. Adds to the confusion, which you don't want. So, Admiral, I have a follow-up question. Kind of visibility's come up a couple of times. I would imagine that this takes an extra priority, extra importance in the context of threat actors and their capabilities, and just, you know, your take on visibility in water, and, you know, when you see something like Indestroyer 2 emerge, or this pipe dream platform, it's a severe escalation when you're specifically targeting ICS and OT. You know, how are we expecting under-resourced smaller utilities to defend against this kind of sophistication?
Well, the strategy is built around the idea, and Michael makes this every day at the sector level. The strategy broadly has been try to look at this from a sector perspective where there's commonality of structure, commonality of mission, commonality of purpose, and therefore we can share information, you know, more broadly, but with more specificity. The thing I always thought was, a lot of times, and I watch private organizations, in this case, municipalities in many cases, think that the focus should be going to the sector. And I always wondered, you know, why aren't we tying together directly small, same size, same structured entities that are operating across different states, different jurisdictions? You know, why aren't they collaborating directly a little bit more? I'm not saying they aren't, but it hasn't been a huge part of the model to date. The other thing I always found challenging was, look, to make this work, we're talking about sustained effort and prioritization over time. And so many times, I say this as a guy who was part of the federal leadership who would sometimes make, you know, sort of input into these decisions at the cabinet level about, you know, like these 100-day sprints that we like to do. I am not the biggest fan of this approach, because my argument was, this leads us to believe that we can solve a problem in 99 days. So it's hurry up, lots of facts, lots of activity. There's no sustained commitment. I bet you if I went to DHS and said, okay, let's go back and look at the sprints you've done to date, show me where we are in actual execution. You know,
not great.
You just put the sprint out and then you go on to the next topic, and you just totally forget. That aspect of the approach we use, I just really always frustrating me. I cannot stand these 100-day sprints. I just think it's a trap, personally, in many ways.
Yeah. And Michael, did you want to add anything to that?
You know, in mean, there is a small but dedicated community of folks who want to, it used to be called consolidation, and then it became regionalization, and it became partnerships. But because there are so many different varieties of partnerships and collaboration, that their goal is to connect utilities, either administratively or physically. One of the fail-safes that we have, if there were to be a cyber attack that affected the water supply, is that water utilities are not interconnected, generally not interconnected.
Right.
But they could still share administration and management and IT, and maybe that's a great solution to think about as a way of utilities pooling their resources to hire the experts to help them out. On the 100-day sprints, I'm not sure why they set it at 100. It should be 1,000-day sprints. There's a lot of work to do, and the water sector is in the middle of its 100-day sprint, and I think what's going to come out of it is more of a promotion of DHS's best practices and free tools, and then hopefully also a greater knowledge about ICS monitoring. It's something that probably only larger utilities can afford to do at this point, but it's important. It's an important tool. It's a valuable tool, and I don't think there's enough information out there. So to the extent that the water sector's 100-day sprint can produce some information about pros and cons and best practices, I think will be helpful.
Yeah, I remember last year there was a state of the industry survey focused on water, and it identified a number of areas of need, starting from training all the way to threat intelligence and even federal loans and grants. Talk to me about the biggest needs and how are they being fulfilled, if at all. And Admiral Rogers, if you want to start with this.
I mean, I think we've done collectively a good job of identifying what needs are. Where I think the challenge is, okay, guys, so how do we meet them? This isn't that we don't understand the problem set. It's not that we don't have an awareness of the dimensions of the problem, but where are the practical steps to get to execution? How are we going to address that? I still think that that's an area where we need help, where utilities, individuals in this sector, where they need help. I think also, the one thing I didn't see in the recommendation that I thought was, you can argue, I guess it's part of the assessment piece, but I just thought everything to me starts with the basics of cyber hygiene. And for me, that's always a good starting point in an organization. And I wish it emphasized that a little bit more.
That would have been a good question for the survey to ask.
Where are you? What are the basics?
Yeah.
Because that also helps you. The more you understand the basics, the better able then you're able to tailor a specific set of recommendations and initiatives to address your challenges. Because every system's slightly different. Right.
And Michael, what's your take on that? I mean, if we're telling utilities they need to do more risk assessments, if they're not equipped to do a risk assessment or don't fully understand what one is or don't have the money for it, what's the point? I mean, what's your experience there?
Yeah, no, that's a tough one. I mean, there's a law that requires risk assessments to be done every 5 years, along with a emergency plan every 5 years by all systems of a certain size. I think it comes out to around 10,000 utilities. So the entire sector didn't have to comply. It's not quite clear the thoroughness on the cyber side of those assessments, because it was also supposed to assess your risk to natural disasters and climate change and this and that. So utilities really ought to be doing cyber-focused assessments so that they can just understand their systems and then figure out what gaps they may have and fill those. Unfortunately, the whole sector didn't have to conduct those assessments. And,
right.
It's probably something that ought to change. It's a fundamental first step.
All right, so we're coming up against time, and I just want to one last question, one last opportunity for both of you to kind of just maybe discuss where are we headed, where should we be headed? Are we looking at a sector where there's going to be a lot of regulation to kind of lock down cybersecurity? Just Admiral Rogers, if you want to start us off.
So I wonder if over time, in some aspects of critical infrastructure, so think about water, think about power generation, the kinds of things that underpin day-to-day life, if you will, and our ability to function as a society, as a nation. I wonder if in some subset, we're going to see over time the mandating of cybersecurity minimum. But my concern is, I just think that the current model can't deliver what, and it's not because people aren't trying hard. I don't need to apply that at all. But some of these are so small and just require so much external assistance that I'm not sure this, but we'll just keep telling you what you need to do. Even at times as we acknowledge that we need to continue to improve in how we do that. I'm not sure that that fundamental approach is going to get us where we need to go, just given the way that this sector is structured.
Right. And Michael, final word, your take on this?
Yeah, I fully expect that we will be regulated. It's just a matter of when. And if there's another Oldsmar, I think members of Congress will stumble all over themselves to be the first to introduce the bill. But we as a sector have been talking a lot about what we can deliver to Congress in terms of a solution. Because we do recognize, as my chairman had testified last year, there needs to be some rigor and some accountability. Mm-hmm. We're going to get utilities to do at least the basics. So I think we'll see something. I don't know what it's going to look like yet. It's a new world for us in the water sector, but something's going to look different soon.
All right. That was great. If you have any questions, go ahead and chat your great questions for the panel to your everyone option. We do have Mike here as the moderator who will take those questions if we have any. Okay. All right, great. Well, Mike, I don't see any questions right there. We can go ahead and close out if you'd like. If there's any closing words that you'd like to give, just thank everyone, and we can close her out.
No, I just want to thank the guests. There was a lot of great information there, and I hope everyone found it useful today.
All right, perfect. So that actually concludes today's session. We thank you all for joining us today. I want to thank our sponsor, Clarity, for sponsoring today's event. And this concludes today's e-showcase. Thank you all for attending. Again, the recording will be available at web.org, and we will send all registrants an email tomorrow with that link. And please visit our event calendar to sign up for future events.